What happens when one of television's most provocative hosts meets a guest who refuses to play by the rules? You won't believe what unfolds when a routine late-night interview transforms into an explosive confrontation that left audiences speechless and social media in absolute chaos. Tonight, we're diving deep into the shocking events that transpired during what was supposed to be a standard promotional appearance that instead became one of the most controversial moments in late-night television history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two powerful personalities clash in the most unexpected way possible. The atmosphere in Studio 57 was electric as cameras rolled for what everyone expected to be another routine celebrity interview. Meghan Markle had arrived to promote her latest philanthropic venture, looking composed and media-ready in an elegant navy blazer. The production team buzzed with their usual pre-show energy, completely unaware that they were about to witness television history in the making. Stephen Colbert emerged from behind his desk with his trademark grin, but seasoned observers of the show might have noticed something different in his demeanor tonight. There was an edge to his usual comedic warmth, a sharpness that suggested he had prepared more than just his standard softball questions. The audience, packed with his loyal fans, erupted in their customary applause as he launched into his opening. Banter. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest tonight," Colbert announced, his voice carrying that familiar mix of enthusiasm and barely contained mischief. "Someone who's no stranger to making headlines, whether she's walking down a royal aisles or walking away from royal duties." The audience chuckled, but there was an uncomfortable undertone to the joke that seemed to linger in the studio air. Meghan entered to polite applause, her smile perfectly calibrated for the cameras. She settled into the guest chair with practiced grace, but those watching closely might have noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clasped just a bit too tightly in her lap. She had clearly come prepared for the usual late-night treatment, light jokes, gentle ribbing, and plenty of opportunities to plug her latest project. "Meghan, great to have you here," Colbert began, leaning back in his chair with deceptive casualness. "I have to say, you look fantastic for someone who's been through so much drama." The word hung in the air like a challenge, and Meghan's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. "Thank you, Stephen. I'm excited to be here and talk about the work we're doing with our foundation," she replied, her media training evident in every carefully modulated syllable. She was clearly attempting to steer the conversation toward safer territory, but Colbert wasn't about to make it that easy. "Oh, we'll get to that," he said, waving dismissively. "But first, I think our audience is curious about some other things. You know, the elephant in the room, or should I say, the royals not in the room." His grin widened as nervous laughter rippled through the studio audience. Meghan's posture stiffened slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I'm here to focus on positive work that's making a real difference in people's lives," she said firmly, though her tone carried a warning that a more perceptive interviewer might have heeded. But Colbert was just getting started. Right, the positive work. But come on, Meghan, and I hope you don't mind me calling you Meghan, not Your Royal Highness or anything like that. You have to admit, timing is everything in show business, and boy, did you pick some interesting timing for your career moves." The studio fell quieter now, the audience sensing that this wasn't going to be the typical celebrity love fest they'd expected. Meghan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but years of dealing with hostile media had taught her to choose her battles carefully. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Stephen, but I've always made decisions based on what I felt was right for my family and my values," she responded, her voice still controlled but with steel beginning to creep into it. Colbert leaned forward, his comedic mask slipping to reveal something more predatory underneath. "Values, sure. Family, absolutely. But let's talk about timing for a second. The Oprah interview, the Netflix deal, the book, all happening while the royal family was dealing with some pretty serious stuff. Prince Philip's health. The Queen's final years. I mean, that's quite a coincidence, don't you think? The question landed like a slap across the studio. This wasn't typical late-night banter anymore. This was an accusation disguised as comedy, and everyone in Studio 57 could feel the temperature dropping by several degrees. Meghan's carefully maintained composure began to crack, her eyes flashing with indignation. I think you're trivializing some very serious issues, Stephen. Mental health, racism, the treatment of women in the media. These aren't punchlines. Oh, I'm not making jokes about those things, Colbert replied, his tone growing more aggressive. I'm questioning the narrative. I'm wondering about the convenient timing of revelations that just happened to coincide with major media deals worth millions of dollars. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and for the first time since the interview began, Meghan's media-trained facade began to slip completely. Her hands unclenched from her lap, and she sat forward in her chair, no longer the gracious guest playing along with late-night television's unwritten rules. Convenient? She repeated, her voice rising slightly. You think racism is convenient? You think harassment and death threats are convenient timing? The audience was dead silent now, sensing that something unprecedented was happening before their eyes. But Colbert wasn't backing down. In fact, he seemed energized by her reaction, leaning into the confrontation with the instincts of a predator who had just drawn blood. Look, I'm not saying you orchestrated anything, he continued, his voice dripping with false reasonableness. I'm just saying that for someone who claims to want privacy, you sure do have a lot of very public moments. The timing just seems strategic, almost like everything was planned out by a very savvy publicity team. The studio audience was now completely silent, the usual whoops and applause replaced by an uncomfortable tension that seemed to press down on everyone present. Camera operators exchanged nervous glances, and the show's producers could be seen frantically whispering into their headsets from the control booth above. Meghan's eyes blazed with fury, but her voice remained controlled. Barely. Strategic? You want to talk about strategy, Stephen? Let's talk about your strategy right now. Ambushing a guest with baseless accusations for what? Ratings? YouTube clicks? Is this really what late-night television has become? Colbert's grin widened, but it was no longer friendly. Hey, I'm just asking the questions that a lot of people are thinking. Isn't that what journalism is supposed to be about? Or are we only allowed to ask the pre-approved questions that your handlers provided? My handlers? Meghan's voice cracked, with disbelief. You think I need handlers to respond to your amateur psychology hour? You're sitting there making implications about my character, my motives, my family, and you're calling it journalism? The host's mask was slipping now too, revealing something uglier beneath his comedic persona. I'm calling it accountability. For years, we've watched this carefully crafted narrative play out across every media platform, and nobody's allowed to ask the hard questions without being labeled as racist or sexist or whatever the defense of the week happens to be. Meghan shot up slightly in her chair, her composure cracking further. Defense of the week? Are you seriously suggesting that racism isn't real? That the documented harassment, the death threats, the constant invasions of privacy, that's all just a convenient narrative? I'm saying, Colbert replied, his tone growing more aggressive, that crying racism has become a very effective way to shut down legitimate criticism. And it's worked pretty well for you, hasn't it? Anytime someone questions your decisions, your timing, your motivations, boom, you're the victim again. The accusation hit the studio like a thunderclap. Several audience members audibly gasped, and the camera operators were now openly staring at the unprecedented confrontation unfolding before them. This had gone far beyond uncomfortable television. This was character assassination disguised as an interview. Meghan's hands were trembling now, whether from anger or hurt or both. Legitimate criticism? Is that what you call spreading conspiracy? Theories about my mental health struggles? About my family's safety? About my children? Her voice was rising, the careful media training finally beginning to crack under the pressure. I haven't mentioned your children, Colbert shot back, but his tone suggested he wasn't above going there if pushed. But since you brought them up, let's talk about how they factor into this carefully orchestrated public relations campaign. Cute kids, great photo ops, perfect for the Netflix documentaries. Stop. The word came out like a whip crack, and Meghan's entire demeanor changed. The polished Duchess facade had completely evaporated, replaced by something raw and dangerous. You want to question my career choices? Fine. You want to psychoanalyze my marriage? Go ahead. But if you think you're going to sit there and insinuate that I'm exploiting my children for publicity, then you have absolutely no idea who you're dealing with. Colbert seemed to realize he had crossed a line, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. I'm dealing with someone who's made a career out of playing the victim while simultaneously building a media empire. Someone who claims to want privacy while doing tell-all interviews and Netflix series. Someone who what? Meghan interrupted, her voice now openly hostile. Someone who refused to stay silent when I was being systematically destroyed. By an institution that was supposed to protect me? Someone who chose to speak my truth instead of covering up decades of dysfunction and abuse? The studio was dead silent now, the confrontation having escalated far beyond anything anyone had expected. Even the usually reliable studio audience seemed stunned into complete silence, unsure whether they were witnessing great television or a complete catastrophe. Your truth, Colbert repeated mockingly. That's convenient phrasing. What about everyone else's truth? What about the people whose lives were disrupted by your revelations? What about the family members who couldn't defend themselves because they were bound by duty and protocol, while you were free to say whatever you wanted on international television? Meghan's composure was hanging by the thinnest of threads now. Her media training warred with her natural instinct to fight back, and the internal battle was visible in every line of her body. Bound by duty? Is that what you call enabling a system that drove me to the point where I didn't want to be alive anymore? Is that what you call protecting an institution over protecting a human being? The raw pain in her voice cut through the studio like a knife, but Colbert showed no mercy. If anything, he seemed to smell blood in the water and was closing in for the kill. Oh, here we go, he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. The suicide card. How convenient that this comes up every time someone asks tough questions. Mental health is serious, Meghan, but using it as a shield to deflect legitimate criticism? That's not just manipulative. It's insulting to people who actually struggle with these issues without million-dollar media deals to cushion the blow. The studio went completely silent. Even the crew members, who had seen countless interviews go off the rails, were frozen in shock at what they were witnessing. The accusation was so brutal, so calculated, that it seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. Meghan's face went pale, then flushed with fury. For a moment she seemed unable to speak, her mouth opening and closing as if she couldn't find words adequate to respond to such a vicious attack. When she finally found her voice, it was barely controlled rage. "How dare you?" she whispered, her words cutting through the silence like shards of glass. "How dare you sit there and trivialize someone's mental health struggles for your pathetic ratings grab? You know nothing about what I went through, nothing about the nights I lay awake planning how to end my life, because the pressure and the lies and the systematic destruction of my character had pushed me to the brink." Colbert leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to one of mock concern. "And yet here you are, thriving. Netflix deals, Spotify contracts, best-selling books, magazine covers. For someone who was so destroyed by the system, you sure bounced back quickly once the checks started rolling in." Bounced back? Meghan's voice cracked with emotion. "You think making the decision to save my own life and protect my family is bouncing back? You think finding the strength to speak truth to power is somehow opportunistic? I think, Colbert said, his tone growing increasingly venomous, that you've turned victimhood into a very profitable brand. And I think you're sitting here tonight, on my show, trying to sell that brand to my audience. But some of us aren't buying it anymore. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Meghan's hands were shaking now, and her carefully controlled demeanor was completely shattered. A brand? You think my pain is a brand? You think the harassment of my family, the threats against my children, the racist coverage that drove me to contemplate suicide, you think that's all just marketing? I think, Colbert replied coldly, that you're very good at playing the victim when it suits your purposes. And I think you've made a fortune doing it while throwing the people who supported you under the bus. The studio was now in complete chaos. Audience members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, some looking toward the exits. The production crew was frantically trying to figure out how to handle what was quickly becoming a complete disaster. From the control booth, frantic hand signals were being sent to Colbert, clearly telling him to wrap up the segment, but he ignored them completely. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that echoed through the studio like a gunshot. I don't have to sit here and listen to this character assassination disguised as journalism. You're not asking hard questions, Stephen. You're peddling conspiracy theories and personal attacks because you know it'll get you clicks and views. Sit down, Meghan, Colbert said, his voice now openly hostile. We're not done here. You came on my show. You're going to answer my questions. I came on your show to talk about meaningful work, not to be ambushed by someone who's clearly decided to make his career destroying mine, she shot back, her voice now openly furious. Destroying your career? Colbert laughed bitterly. Your career is built on destruction. You destroyed relationships, you destroyed institutions, you destroyed family bonds. All for what? Money? Fame? Revenge? I spoke my truth, Meghan said, her voice rising to match his aggression. I refuse to be silenced by people who would rather protect their precious institution than protect a human being. And if that threatens you, if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you should ask yourself why. Your truth, Colbert sneered. Always your truth, never just the truth. Always qualified, always tailored, always perfectly crafted to make you look like the victim, while everyone else looks like the villain. The truth is that I was failed by people who were supposed to protect me, Meghan fired back. The truth is that I was abandoned by an institution that cared more about its image than about the well-being of the people within it. The truth is that I had to choose between my life and their comfort, and I chose my life. The truth, Colbert said, his voice dripping with contempt, is that you were given opportunities that millions of people would kill for, and you threw them away the moment things got difficult. The truth is that you couldn't handle the pressure of actual responsibility, so you ran away and then spent years trying to justify your abandonment. The word abandonment hit Meghan like a physical blow. Her entire body tensed, and for a moment, she looked like she might physically lunge at her tormentor. Instead, she took a deep breath and straightened to her full height, her voice becoming deadly quiet. Abandonment, she repeated, the word dripping with venom. You want to talk about abandonment? Let's talk about how I was abandoned by every single person who was supposed to protect me. Let's talk about how I was thrown to the wolves while they all stood by and watched. Let's talk about how I had to save myself because no one else would. But Colbert wasn't finished. He sensed that he had found her breaking point, and he pressed his advantage with ruthless precision. You saved yourself? He said with a cruel laugh. Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you saved yourself. Right into a mansion in Montecito. Right into multi-million-dollar deals. Right into a lifestyle that most people can only dream of. Some abandonment. Some sacrifice. Meghan's eyes flashed with a fury so intense that several audience members visibly recoiled. You have no idea what sacrifice means, she said, her voice now deadly quiet. You sit in your comfortable studio, protected by your network, surrounded by people who laugh at your jokes whether they're funny or not, and you think you understand what it means to lose everything for the sake of your principles. Principles? Colbert scoffed. What principles? The principle of cashing in on family drama? The principle of burning bridges and then selling the ashes to the highest bidder? That was the moment everything changed. Meghan's demeanor shifted, completely, her fury transforming into something colder, more calculated, more dangerous. When she spoke again, her voice carried the unmistakable tone of someone who had finally decided to stop playing defense. You want to talk about principles, Stephen? Let's talk about the principle of a grown man bullying a woman on national television for ratings. Let's talk about the principle of using your platform to spread lies and conspiracy theories about someone's mental health. Let's talk about the principle of a so-called comedian who thinks trauma is a punchline. The studio fell deadly silent. Even Colbert seemed taken aback by the sudden shift in her energy, but he was too committed to his attack to back down now. I'm not bullying anyone, he said defensively. I'm asking the questions that… Questions? Meghan cut him off with a laugh so sharp it could have drawn blood. Is that what you call this character assassination? This isn't journalism, Stephen. This is a middle-aged man having a public meltdown because he can't handle the fact that a woman refused to be silenced. Now wait just a… No, you wait, Meghan said, her voice rising to fill the entire studio. You've had your fun. You've gotten your clicks. You've proven to your audience that you're willing to destroy someone's reputation for entertainment. But here's what you didn't count on. I'm not the same person who walked into that palace years ago. I'm not the same person who smiled politely, while people tried to destroy me from the inside. She took a step closer to his desk, her presence now commanding the entire studio. I survived your institution's attempt to silence me. I survived the media's attempts to destroy me. I survived death threats and harassment, and people like you who think my pain is their entertainment. And you know what? I'm still here. I'm still fighting. I'm still speaking truth to power, even when that power comes in the form of a talk show host who's clearly forgotten what integrity means. Colbert's face was flushed now, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. You don't get to come on my show and lecture me about integrity. You don't get to… I get to do whatever I want, Meghan said, her voice cutting through his protest like a blade. Because unlike you, I'm not beholden to anyone anymore. I don't need your approval. I don't need your platform, and I certainly don't need to sit here and listen to your pathetic attempts to tear me down. She turned to face the camera directly, ignoring Colbert completely. To everyone watching this, I want you to remember this moment. Remember how a woman was treated when she tried to speak about serious issues. Remember how mental health was mocked, how trauma was trivialized, how asking for basic human dignity was turned into a joke. The camera operators, unsure what to do, kept filming as Meghan continued her direct address to the audience. This is what happens when you refuse to stay silent. This is what happens when you choose your truth over their comfort. They try to destroy you, they try to discredit you, and when that doesn't work, they try to humiliate you on national television. She turned back to Colbert, who was now sitting in stunned silence. But here's the thing you never understood, Stephen. I'm not breakable anymore. I'm not the person who can be intimidated into silence. I'm not the person who will smile politely while you try to destroy me for entertainment. Meghan, I think we should… Colbert started, but she held up a hand to silence him. No, we shouldn't. We shouldn't pretend this was an interview. We shouldn't pretend this was journalism. We shouldn't pretend this was anything other than a public execution, disguised as entertainment. She began unhooking her microphone with deliberate precision. And we definitely shouldn't pretend that I'm going to sit here for one more second while you try to profit off my pain. The microphone dropped to the floor with a loud thud that echoed through the completely silent studio. Meghan straightened. Her blazer looked directly into the camera one last time and delivered her final words with devastating calm. "I came here to talk about making a difference in the world. Instead, I got a masterclass in why some people are so threatened by women who refuse to be victims. Consider this my resignation from your twisted version of entertainment." With that, she turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the studio floor in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to applaud or flee. Colbert remained frozen at his desk, his face a mask of shock and barely contained rage. As Meghan reached the studio door, she paused and turned back one final time. "Good luck explaining this to your advertisers, Stephen, and good luck looking yourself in the mirror tomorrow morning." The door closed behind her with a definitive click, leaving the studio in absolute silence. Colbert stared at the door for several long moments before slowly turning back to his desk, his hands visibly shaking. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of his humiliation, as he realized that his calculated attack had backfired spectacularly. "We'll be right back," he mumbled into his microphone, but his voice lacked any of its usual confidence. The audience remained silent, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of Meghan's car starting could be heard as she drove away from what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments in late-night television history. The confrontation was over, but the consequences were just beginning.